I'm Peggy Grieve, and I come from the state of Minnesota in the U.S., and I became involved with the foundation from the very beginning. Its creation was an idea that Steve Shea, Steve Weinroth, and I had and were able to put into operation in 2007 when we accepted our first classes at AUCA and CAEF.
My name is Mary Ginsberg, and I was lucky enough to become involved with U.S CAEF through Peggy because we'd known each other for a very long time, and because I had studied Russian and Chinese and was interested in this part of the world and spent half my career in finance and the other half in academia, I was more or less appropriate to be part of the organization. I was just lucky that Peggy found and wanted me.
We have to go back to 1991 when Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan were all declaring themselves to be independent countries. And when this huge change occurred, there were legislators in the United States who wanted to find a way to help energize the economies after they were emerging for the many years of Soviet control. So they came up with the idea of enterprise funds, that the U.S. government would create enterprise funds, give them the money, but then they would appoint a private sector board of people who had experience in finance, banking, private equity investment, and give them the mission to help foster the economies of the 5 Central Asian countries through small and medium-sized lending programs, from investments in companies. They were to transfer know-how, their approach to business, and hopefully help the people and the economies to flourish. But all of them had a sunset date, which means that at a certain point in time, we had to close down the enterprise fund and then either return the money to the U.S. Congress, or alternatively petition Congress to set up a legacy foundation to carry on in some way the original mission. Well, I had been appointed to the old enterprise fund by President Clinton, and soon after I joined, Steve Weinroth was also appointed, and we worked together for many years. Mainly we said no to the investments. Steve Shea, on the other hand, had decided after this long career, he was the president of the largest bank in the state of New Hampshire, that he and his wife wanted to do something where he could use his skills and give back. So they joined the fund, and he was responsible for Uzbekistan. But because he was so talented, he soon became the director of the entire fund. And being practical business people, the three of us sat down and said, we can do something better with the money, the proceeds from the liquidation, than just giving it back to the U.S. Congress, who gives it to the Treasury, and it just disappears. And so we looked at our own experience in Central Asia and decided that one of the best experiences that we had, and where there was a huge need, was for business education for the young people at the undergraduate level. And that the need was very great, particularly among brilliant young people who could not afford an education at a university like AUCA or CAEF. We reached this conclusion because while we were at the fund, we engaged in all this training of the young people that we hired. We gave them credit training, finance skills. And so when we dissolved the fund, they all were able to go get good jobs at banks, at other financial institutions. And to us, that was a real inspiration. And we did our normal due diligence, as business people do, and determined that there were two universities, AUCA and CAEF, that taught undergraduate business with a Western curriculum in English and using Western teaching methodologies. And we then also determined that the cost of education here was much lower than it would be if we took our limited amount of money, just over $17 million, and gave scholarships for students to come to the U.S. We also believed that there was a power in trying to bring together students from the 5 countries that I mentioned and have them experience their years in university together. We then looked around for who would be great at helping to administer this program, because all 3 of us are business people, we're not educators. And we found several different companies. American Councils was one of them. And after the normal due diligence process, we hired them and have never regretted it. They have been fabulous. It then took us about 5-6 years to convince Congress that our idea for an educational foundation in the region at AUC and CAEF, administered by American Councils for International Education, providing scholarships in business, economics, and now software engineering to students based on both merit and financial need was a good idea. And when we started, we were the first foundation to do so based on financial need. We still are the only foundation that tries to bring students from all 5 countries together. And that's how we started, opening our doors in 2007. Oh, that's such a hard question. I think when we started, one of the things we felt very strongly about is this was to help the fellows, and that we had to listen to them. So every year when Steve Shea, Steve Weinroth, and I would come, we would sit down and meet with each class. We would talk to them about their experience, what they liked, what they didn't like, how they could make it better. If they were giving us advice on how to run the program, what advice would they give us? And year by year, that process of listening really helped me realize the importance of listening and adapting and changing in accordance with what our fellows thought would best serve the program. It also has made me very humble. Every time I meet our alumni or the incoming class or the graduating seniors, I am just amazed at what they have accomplished in terms of their education, but also in terms of building communities at their universities, with each other, and as they go out within their own communities. And they are so talented and so generous with each other, with their time, and with their communities, that every time I meet them, I am inspired and humbled by their leadership.
It gives me hope for the next generation. It really, truly does, because I think the thing that always amazes me about these kids is they look for every single opportunity, they go after it, and they succeed with it. And they don't take anything for granted. They work so hard. They are not only fantastic academically. I mean, yesterday we saw, as Oren Beck said, we swept the field with all the honors and the awards and the valedictorian and all the rest of it. They managed to do that, and still they managed to do volunteer work and run marathons for charities and go work in the orphanages, and they start their own businesses, and they start businesses for communities of people like the mama communities that they've organized. So I watch these kids and I'm just amazed, partly because, and I don't mean to sound nasty about this, but I think American kids have a sense of entitlement because they've grown up expecting an awful lot. And here, the Central Asian kids that we've worked with, they don't take anything for granted. They go after absolutely everything, and they succeed, and they still manage to be very close to their families and look after their families and look after each other. And it's just, so how does it affect me? It gives me hope for this world.
And who would have thought that in 2007 that Mary and I would be sitting here doing one of our least favorite things, talking on camera and video, but being interviewed by a graduate who is going on to Harvard and being filmed by one of the top videographers, digital filmers, creative minds in Kyrgyzstan. I mean, it's just amazing. Well, let me start with a misconception, because when we formed the foundation, Steve Weinroth, Steve Shea, and I said very strongly that we would never impose a condition of the scholarship on anyone that they had to stay in the region. Now, we hope that they would. We hope that they would continue to build their communities, their countries, and contribute to their place in the world. But we wanted to create and enable students to participate in the global economy. And we know that there are jobs everywhere and education opportunities everywhere. And so, to us, unlike any other program, and because we were an independent foundation, even though our money came from the U.S. government, we could have the freedom to say, no, we are not going to require our graduates to come back and spend a year or 2 years in their communities. We want them to get the best opportunity, pursue their dreams, and just trust that they would be able to help us. And we now have alumni all over Europe, in Asia, in the States, but they continue to be part of the U.S. CAEF family. I mean, we have a director of the Alumni Association who lives in Stockholm and calls in every week with the rest of the alumni directors to help build up the Alumni Society. We have a whole contingent of graduates in Dubai who all came to the conference, continue to be active on social media, and many of our graduates also found ways, even while they were studying abroad, to create apps, to work with the UN, to work with EBRD, to help strengthen the economy. So that misconception that some people might have that they shouldn't be pursuing the best opportunities even if it leads them outside of the region, is just wrong. We want every one of you to have the best opportunities. Life is long, and we are confident that you will find a way to contribute. And you can contribute to the Alumni Association financially, even if you can't participate in the projects that it develops or the leadership breakfasts. As Mary said, you're our hope for the future, and we wouldn't want anyone to feel badly or that they'd somehow let us down or their fellow alumni because they had pursued an opportunity outside of their home country.
I think the Alumni Association is astonishing what they've done so far. Just the last few days in Kazakhstan and now a few days here, all the things that you're doing together, the connections that you're all making. This one is supporting this one wants to start a business, but hey, there's somebody in Kazakhstan who's already doing something that could help you do that. So I have this idea, which started the last couple of days. There should be a big circle with everybody's face on it, and there should be lines drawn between all the connections among, there are 400 of you? 400 alumni? I think you're all helping each other all the time. You're supporting each other, you're giving each other ideas, you're investing in each other's businesses, you're running for each other's charities, it's the most amazing thing. So that's my hope. I have this thing that's in my head with the big circle in everybody's head and the connections, the lines that get drawn among all of them, and that thing will get filled in very, very quickly because you're all doing it all the time. It's the most wonderful thing to watch.
Oh, it's hard to add to that. Really, because, you have done, and when I say you, I mean all the graduates together, so many amazing different things that I never would have thought of. I had a really successful career in business and law, but you keep coming up with ideas. As Mary said, you're the hope of the future. And I am confident that if you continue to support each other, to support the Alumni Association, life is long, and you will have many opportunities to create together a world in which we want our children and grandchildren to live. Shortly after the program started in 2007, we were thinking about how we could incentivize students with some sort of internship in the United States. But we didn't have very much money, and our goal was, of course, to educate as many students as we could in the region. But we decided, and with American Council's great help, we found the Washington Center and looked at the finances and determined that it would be important to add a 4-month work-study program in the United States that would be available for the top students, so that at the end of their experience, there was something they could also aim for and an opportunity that they might not otherwise have. And so we set up the first capstone program and decided that it would continue with each graduating class. Now, the program has gotten better over time. We've gotten better at managing the Washington Center and the internship opportunities, and the feedback again from the capstones helped us to make changes to the program so it would be as impactful as we could possibly create. The other thing that I am sure that it did is for the class that graduates this year in 2024, the one next year in 2025, and the one last year, those 3 years where the U.S. State Department funded the scholarship program, that I am sure has come about not just from seeing the alumni in the region, But every year with the capstones, the board would travel to Washington, have a dinner with the capstones, invite all these people from USAID and the State Department, whether they were intimately involved with the program or not, and have the opportunity to meet these representatives of U.S. CAEF. And because you are all so remarkable, and would tell your stories and what you were doing in DC and a little bit about where you came from, they begin to see the power of the program and follow it. And so when our money was running out, which it inevitably we knew it would, they were willing to step up and bring 3 more classes of U.S. CAEF fellows to Bishkek to study at AUCA. So I think the capstone program was remarkable. We also decided right away that it would be important to have internships in the region. You know, the capstone was sort of an internship because it was work study at the end of 4 years. And we knew the universities had their own internship requirements in the 3rd year. But I could remember the first time I had an internship. And of course I had a father who worked in the office his entire life. And, I had a sense. I visited them there. I knew how he talked on the phone on the weekends when he was working. Even though I had never worked in an office, I was a little bit comfortable with an office and how people looked when they worked in an office and what might happen. It was challenging when I started interning, but I wasn't uncomfortable in the environment. And when the 2 Steves and I thought about the compositions of our class, because we were so happy that we were successful in getting students from different countries and from rural regions as well as urban ones. And most of them had never had a parent who had worked in an office. And so we wanted to give them the opportunity to ease into that experience, to have a little bit of practice. So then when they went for their 3rd year internships, they would be comfortable. And so that's how the internship program started. And we decided that the 2nd year would be the best year. After the 1st year, it's just too soon. It wouldn't be a benefit to the student or to the company because you have to keep the companies interested. And that has evolved over the years. We have lots of companies who are willing to take interns. We have companies established by our alumni who take interns. And we've also managed, even for some of our interns, to get permanent job offers at the end of their 2nd year after they finish the internships. The companies are so impressed by them, they may give them a part-time job for their next year, or they may say, come back and see us. You were terrific. And to me, that's a wonderful tribute to how the program has evolved, students have evolved, and a simple idea ended up being very powerful. And what we wanted to try and do, and we spent a lot of time talking to the board, the original board, as to how to set it up, and looking at the budgets and the programming and how much money we had as the foundation that we could still put into the Alumni Association and spread it out over several years, with the hope that as the Alumni Association gained experience, more alumni became involved, more projects were developed, that the Alumni themselves would see it as valuable to them and want to contribute. We also hoped that other businesses would see the value of this group of remarkable young people and also want to support it in some way, whether it's supporting a particular project that alumni could be involved in, or who knows, that something would evolve. And so that's why we're sustaining it for a few years, but there's no choice. But I'm sure you're all very creative and will figure out a way to do it. And we wish if we had infinite funds, we would keep the scholarship program going. We'd help the Alumni Association on a regular basis, but we just can't.
We had a great presentation the other day about the Alumni Association and their current plans, which are remarkable. And they've gone from an earlier focus on activities for alumni to much more outreach into the community, education possibilities and so on, community events to support their local communities and national communities, and local associations and societies and schools and orphanages and it goes on and on forever. But it was interesting to see this presentation where their goals for 25, 26 have changed from 23, 24, very much more reaching out rather than just looking at the alumni activities. It's terrific.
And the other thing that I was so impressed with is that they are very conscious that they are an association with alumni. So part of this was polling the alumni and saying, what are you most interested in? What would you most support? How do you want this association to go? Whether it's because in this world, everybody is worried about the customer experience, and if you're not delivering to your customer, the other alumni, you're eventually going to fail. But this participatory approach has helped them formulate the areas of focus which they hope are going to resonate with alumni, and also perhaps with donors apart from the foundation.
And it's very interesting. It seems to me the communication that goes out to the alumni is, what activities should we do? What contribution should we make? And what are you going to do about it? It's great.
There were no more different people than Steve Shea, Peggy Grieve, and Steve Weinroth. The one thing we shared in common were a set of values and intellectual rigor and just basic business practice, that you listen to people, you try things out. If it doesn't work, you change it. So we worked really harmoniously with each other. But Steve Shea was this very tall, former successful, professional baseball player in the United States. He loved to fly airplanes. He had a private plane, and he would, when I lived in New York, I had a small place in the country in Connecticut, and he would fly down for the day just because he liked to fly his plane and have lunch and talk about foundation things and that we could do better. Steve Weinroth loved numbers. I mean, he was happiest when you put a bunch of numbers in front of them, and then he'd start figuring out different things, and was tremendous always on the bottom line and switch. I mean, we were all good with numbers, but he was just fanatical. And then, and this is a story about him, there was one AUC graduation, I think it was post-COVID, where there were lots and lots and lots of graduates. I think some people could come back and get their diploma that they hadn't been able to during the COVID years. So we were sitting there for hours as they go. So he starts calculating in his mind as he's sitting there. how many students are there in each class, and how many professors does he think they have? And then what would that mean for AUCA and how you run a university? And he thought that business education and software were in really good shape. He thought a few of the other departments where there were 2 or 3 graduates, that the question that he had, as do we sort of financially, is how do you sustain that if you don't have students willing to take those courses? And so, you know, there's always some number that he would entertain himself with when he was getting bored. But
I got to know them much less. I only had a few years with Steve Shea, and then more years with Steve Weinroth, but I didn't know them nearly as well as Peggy did. So I thought he was wonderful. I thought he was very kind. I thought he was so inspired by these kids. He loved these kids. It was really interesting. But one thing that I would notice about Steve Shea and Steve Weinroth, whenever we would have these board meetings and we would go over all the students' grades, and somebody maybe was having some trouble, and are we going to keep them on probation one more semester? Steve Shea always wanted to give the kid another chance, always, even though there were very clear rules. 2 semesters on probation, and that's it. And Steve Shea would always say, come on, one more, always.
The 2 of them were so funny together, because when they came to Central Asia, you know, Steve Shea drank tons of coffee and smoked cigarettes. Steve Weinroth had given up smoking years ago, but he said he felt inspired by Steve Shea. So the 2 of them would go outside either the Hyatt or the Doskek hotel in Almaty, and they'd be standing out there in the front smoking, and Steve Shea would have a cup of coffee with them as they sort of, you know, talked about it. The other thing that was really wonderful is neither of them danced at all. But the only time, because I knew their wives and talked to them, and the only time you could ever get either of them to dance, and only very reluctantly and just sort of shuffling their feet, was when they were here and one of the graduating fellows would ask them to dance. So they felt that they had to do it. And they secretly enjoyed it, which was really wonderful. And there are a couple of old pictures of both of them dancing away. And, you know, that was just the lovely part of working with them. And of course, working with the students, because we also know how to have fun together. And that's a very important thing in life. You have to enjoy and look for humor, and value all these friendships that you have.
I don't know which would be the right anniversary to do this, but now that there's Instagram and everything you do is there the next day, but I wonder if anybody has actually made a collection of photographs that goes back, say 10 years. Photographs from the graduations, because we know there's always been an excellent photographer out there doing it. And it would be really cool to go back and find pictures that go, you know, make an album, you know, a digital one, so that, you know, it doesn't cause too much trouble. But to go back over some of the annual reports in the graduation books and put together a big digital thing. That would really be fun. We need to think about what would be the right anniversary year to do that. But that would be great, because, you know, there are all kinds of scenes and episodes that would be lovely to look back at again.
Oh, and that's such a good idea. But this reminds me, the graduation book, you know, in our graduation celebration, you know, the first class in 2010, I started saying, well, we have to have a celebration for them. You know, it's important. We invite the parents. We can invite the teachers, but they would not be here but for their parents and the teachers who help them. And and we'll invite the officials from USAID and the council and the embassy, but we want to at least try, because this is a landmark event. And then the next thing I said is, gee, they're all going to go back to their countries, start working. How do they remember each other? They've spent these 4 years together, forged all these friendships. And I said, we have to have a graduation book. And there will be a picture of each graduating fellow and a little bit about, where they came from and what they did. And, this wasn't done in other programs that American councils administered at the time. And so they sort of said, and I said, nope, we're doing it. And they said, well, we don't have time to write. And I said, well, send me the information on each student, something, and the pictures, and I will write it. And so and then of course it was corrected and sent back, because you don't want to say anything about somebody that hasn't been fully vetted. But the first book, which was not very good because I did it mostly, was how we started out. And now that's another transformation. They're so much better because each student goes through and sort of reflects on their own experience, writes it up, and then we put it together, and everybody's gotten so much more professional and takes lots of pictures. So apart from the headshot that we have, the other pictures there and in the annual report are so much better. But I would love your idea, because it would be so wonderful to have some of those funny pictures from the beginning.